Good morning, everybody. My name is Georgie Bailey, and I am the Executive Director of the New York State component of the American Institute of Architects. Our main office is located here in Albany, and we are a statewide organization representing close to 8,000 architects throughout New York. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements. If you are using this for CLE credit, make sure you sign the forms outside. And if you are a member of the AIA, we are offering 5 LUs continuing ed credit. Please make sure you pick up a CE card at some point today. Another thing is this morning at 10:15, we'll have a quick break of 15 minutes. My job this morning is very easy compared to the work that has gone into this program. I'm sure that Bert will recognize one of the spearheads of this program, but I'd like to do it first off, and that's Terry Matthews. Thank you, Terry, for all your hard work. Bert Roslin is an FAIA. He holds the highest designation in fellowship that the American Institute of Architects bestows on its members. Bert has been a leader here in New York at AIA New York State. He is one of our past presidents, and ever since I can remember, he has been a leader in our legislative arena, helping us with the role of the architect in the state legislature, and actually the role of the architect in the communities throughout New York State. Bert is also recognized as a leader at the national level. He serves as the regional director to the American Institute of Architects Board of Directors representing New York State. Bert is a member of the Design Build Institute, and I'm sure you'll be hearing a little bit about that this morning. I think another thing that you also have to know about Bert Roslin, and we think that this is as important as anything else he does, is that he has mentored for years now. He is an adjunct member of one of the Schools of Architecture's faculty. He has mentored those coming into the profession, and we're very, very proud of him. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you Bert Roslin. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgie, for those kind words. I know Georgianne recognized Terry a few minutes ago, but I think it's important that we all recognize the enormous contribution that Terry has made to this program. This is the 4th year that we have held this program. Terry, I'm not quite sure how I got drafted into it, but Terry and I have actually run this program now 4 times. We started out in kind of a garret, for lack of a better term, a small conference room at the Rockefeller Institute, and we had 25 people in toto in the room. The purpose of today's program, as I'm sure all of you are aware, is to help educate those of us in the public sector, both as practitioners serving the public sector and as members of the public sector, either in agencies or in other capacities where we are responsible for the procurement of design and construction services. As Georgie said, I serve on the national board. I am actively engaged with the National Project Delivery Task Force and Knowledge Community, where we look at this on a broad national level. And you will forgive me for saying this, my fellow New Yorkers, but when it comes to public procurement, we are woefully behind the curve. Hopefully, today's program will move us a little bit further along to a place where we will be able to provide all of the tools that are available to us in the construction and design profession to utilize for the benefit of the people of the state of New York in delivering projects effectively, efficiently, and economically. Our governor has focused on design build right now, for which I think Many of us are thankful. However, he looks at it in a very narrow arena. He looks at it in the arena of infrastructure. The Tappan Zee Bridge is glamorous. A new dormitory at SUNY Delhi is not. A new laboratory at Cornell is not necessarily quite as glamorous. So we need to get past that vision that it can work in one arena and make people understand that it can work in all arenas. Having said that, I'd like to introduce our first panel. Oh, we're not advancing slides. I'm sorry. Then I will turn this over to Ken Bond, who I do know, having served with him in this capacity now 4 times. Terry? You're welcome.
Hi. Hello. Thank you for coming. We have a great program, really interesting. And as Bert said, this is the 4th time we've done this here. This panel is an attempt, and we've done this in the past, to focus on the built environment broadly, procurement, which is service delivery, planning, land use planning. In this field, everything sort of gets segmented and fractured and siloed. But if you work on projects, you know that before you get the project, there's a lot of land use planning that has to happen. Then the project happens, and then the finance piece is off, like with a bunch of other professionals. But they all kind of go together. And in New York, they're all controlled by laws at the state, primarily at the state level. So this is an attempt to sort of bring the interconnectedness of these 3 areas as a way of framing the bigger conversation. So you all should have a biography list, so because we wanted not to spend so much time introducing people. You know, we can do, I'm very bad at that, so I'm not going to do that. But I want to thank Kent Gardner, Ken Bond, Kimberly Finnegan, Brian Rahm, and David Kay. And you can look at them, with Cornell, and then the law firms, and then but I'm just so grateful for you all to be here. And what I'd like to do is just start, if that's okay. Is that okay? That's okay. So this is the 5th time, no, well, this is the 4th time we've done this in Albany. And we've done this version of a panel a couple of times. But what I would really like to begin with, and that's why we have Kent here, because he's an economist. Everybody talks about infrastructure is so important for the economy, and as a I got my degree in public administration, so I know just a little bit about some of the theory, but I think it would be really helpful if Kent could just sort of go through, like, the litany that you hear. It would be really nice to know just the, if you want to come up, but you can also sit. Okay.
No, this is fine. Thanks, Terry, and thank you, too, for all the good work you've done to pull this thing together. If you have, those of you who haven't been on our side of the email list, she has been really diligent at making sure we kind of kept up with all the components of this piece. So thanks, Terry. So, you know, I'm in the position of preaching to the choir. I mean, you folks all kind of agreed that infrastructure is important for the economy. So let me put it a little bit of context. First, let's understand the construction sector all by itself, just simply is important. 3.5% of GDP. If you take the finance sector out, you know, we've got that outsized finance sector down in New York City. It's more like 5.2% of total GDP, nearly 500,000 jobs. So, you know, we're looking at a lot of payroll, a lot of people employed in the sector. Every time we do an economic impact study, you know, we take a look at the construction component and assess that. I'm always careful to point out that those are temporary jobs. I said that in public a couple of months ago in regards to this casino project that some of you have maybe read about. And one of the construction workers stood up and said, well, maybe a temporary job for you, buddy, but you know, that's my livelihood. That's how I feed my family. So I think it's important to recognize that construction is an ongoing, even if a particular project it's only temporary. Now, we do a regular economic impact study for the Commission on Independent Colleges and Universities, and we've just completed our most recent one. And colleges and universities, of course, as Don Menery is pleased to know, are constantly building stuff. And the construction, so what we do for that economic impact study is instead of taking a look at a single year, we try to get a steady state understanding of how much colleges and universities are spending on construction. And for the independents, the private colleges and universities, our estimate is about $2 billion a year across the state. So that's a lot of money being spent on an ongoing basis by an important sector of the economy. So not only do we have the direct impact of construction, but of course we also have the indirect, the spillover impacts. We hear talk about multipliers, and it's kind of my job to assign a multiplier to some of these things. And I can tell you that in crude terms, the multiplied effect of construction is roughly equal to the direct effect. So we use a multiplier a little under 2. So that's in 2 pieces, 2 flavors. First, you have the suppliers to the firms that are doing the construction, and then we have the spending of the people who are earning their living, drawing their paychecks from the firms. So combined, that's multiplier is a little under 2. But what's of more interest to you, and I think more relevant to what Terry wanted me to address today, is the things that infrastructure facilitates. Infrastructure is a classic part of what we in economics call a public good. A public good is something that it's not simply a good owned by the public, although that tends to be the case. We economists redefine terms once in a while. A public good is something that is what we call non-excludable. Non-excludable means I grab a pastry. That's an excludable good because as soon as I'm done with that pastry, it is not available to anyone else. Now, 2 of us cannot consume the same pastry. At the same time, if we get something called a public good, then let's consider the GPS signal. We can all use the GPS as we're heading down the thruway, and there's no less GPS signal for anyone else to consume simply because I've turned my GPS on. It doesn't mean that there's less signal for you. So that's a pure public good. And with the pure public good, the problem is that it's very difficult to monetize a pure public good. The GPS network, for example, is very appropriately something that the public sector will finance and support. The difficulty with that is that sometimes we underinvest in those public goods just because there isn't a way to make money off of them. We're really, really good at making money off of pastries. And that's because, I want the pastry, you've got the pastry, I'm willing to exchange money for the pastry, and as long as you get more than it costs you to make it, then you're happy to make pastries. It doesn't work so well for a GPS signal. Infrastructure has some of the same characteristics with one modification, of course, and that is that infrastructure is typically subject to congestion. So if you're heading up to Saratoga on 87, if you're traveling at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, adding your car to 87 probably doesn't change the amount of time it takes for anyone else to get there. If you're talking about 7:30 in the morning, on the contrary, coming into Albany, every additional car adds a little bit more, so there's a congestion component to that. But nonetheless, again, the basic point is that infrastructure typically falls into some category of public good, and as a consequence, it's difficult to get the private sector to wholly pay for those goods, and we need the public sector to get involved. And that's why there's a public investment and a public need and a public interest in our investments. A couple of other components. We also know that there is a stimulative effect of infrastructure investment. So, back in the Great Depression, for those of you who have read Robert Caro's biography of Robert Moses, you know that one of the reasons that Moses was so successful for New York State was that he always had an army of engineers ready to go with plans to build stuff. He always had a list of things, and the second that the Roosevelt administration would announce a new plan, they'd all hop in the car, drive to Washington, roll out the plans, and say, listen, we'll have a shovel in the ground in 2 weeks. If you say yes, we're going to have people employed, we're going to start paying people, and we're going to start stimulating the New York economy and the national economy. We're ready to go. And that stimulative effect, I think, was also reflected in the AIRA stimulus project we did in the Great Recession, the Great Recession. We put a lot of money into the economy. We put a lot of money into the economy very quickly by focusing on infrastructure investment. And if you've been reading Krugman, Paul Krugman has been arguing that we should be spending a whole lot more on infrastructure, and there's some good arguments to be made there. For one thing, again, it's an immediate injection of funds into the economy. Secondly, you can do it with debt, something that Governor Cuomo is very cognizant of. If you take a look at the Regional Economic Development Council initiatives, it's been a very shrewd decision on his part. You can make a big splash on economic development, but you're doing it all with debt. As a consequence, it doesn't hit your operating budget. People in the Finger Lakes have been very involved in that project. In the Finger Lakes, people will come up to me and complain, and they say, well, I can build stuff, but there's no money here to maintain it. There's no money to actually develop a program. And I remind them that this is a feature, not a bug. Debt is very convenient for elected officials. So a couple of cautions. Yes, infrastructure spending is stimulative, and that's a good thing when we need stimulus. On the other hand, and some of you were part of this, there is a kind of a construction industrial complex that is interested in building pretty much anything. When there's an interest in building things, you can see the construction sector, organized labor, and elected officials who love to cut ribbons all coming together to support spending, sometimes fairly liberal spending, on building new stuff. So that, I think, is the caution that we always have to worry about. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily build the best stuff. The TZ is a great example. I think the notion of talking about this as a glamorous project, I like that. Politicians love glamorous projects, even though it sounds a little odd. We've got a glamorous project that just got started in Rochester. Back in the 1970s, we built this little ring road around the downtown called the Inner Loop. It was a stupid decision back then, and planners have been wanting to reverse it ever since, and they persuaded Louise Slaughter to get a slug of money to fill in the ditch. So we're spending $23 million filling in this ditch that circles Rochester, and we're going to create some more developable real estate in the downtown. We already have a little bit if you've been in Rochester lately. There's just a little bit of spare real estate in downtown, but we're going to create a little bit more. $23 million, is that the best place to put $23 million? I guess I would question that. So that's the challenge, I think. On the one hand, it's, infrastructure can have a very positive impact. We know that infrastructure influences the shape of communities. So prudent infrastructure investment can alter the shape of a community permanently. If you look at the decisions of Portland and Ottawa prominently to not build parking, that has influenced the shape of their municipalities and has certainly altered the viability of public transit. At the same time, building infrastructure can have negative effects. About 10 years ago, we expanded Route 322 into Canandaigua in Ontario County. Now, Rochester, MSA, I hate to admit this, but we're just not growing, right? The population's been stagnant now for a number of decades. We're not shrinking, but we're not growing. And so to build a 4-lane highway out into the hinterland, because there was a little bit of congestion there, it just makes it easier to flatten out the population. And that's not really a smart way to build your community. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Terry.
Thank you very much. And that was a really good way of segueing into the next three panelists who will be talking about, let me look at my notes, projects. Using real-life projects to illuminate certain issues. And the way we're going to do it is Kimberly will go first, and then I believe Brian or David, and it's in the note. You know how you're going. And Kent and Ken can interject. Ken is finance, you're the economist. So, and if you want to come up, you can, but if you want to sit, that'd be great. Okay? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you might have to turn it on. Push it toward you.
Is that on? Better? Yes? Okay. My name is Kimberly Finnegan. I'm a private attorney, but I'm not here as one of those attorneys as it was put today. I'm here as an economic developer. One of my clients is the Center for Economic Growth, which is an 11-county economic development organization headquartered right here in Albany. And there are a couple of projects that I wanted to discuss related to infrastructure. that we have started on. The reason that the Center for Economic Growth, or CEG, has focused on infrastructure now is because we revised our strategic plan based on the entire 300 plus C-level executive members to include 3 different pillars. One is entrepreneurship, one is workforce development, and the other is infrastructure. The work group for infrastructure decided to create a marketing tool / inventory tool of all of the community plans that are out there right now, all of the approval processes, both on the state and local level, and to include sites that are shovel ready and also that aren't quite there. In starting to do that, the Center for Economic Growth and National Grid partnered a year ago this past October, so October 2013, on the Tech Valley and Beyond infrastructure forum that they had. Some of you may have attended. There are 400 plus attendees at the 2-day event that was held at the Desmond. And included in your materials is the entire workbook that was used for that program. There are a lot of really, really hard questions asked, and people were in groups of what they were interested in and were forced to answer those questions and to present on them by the end of it. So why did we do that? We need, at least for the capital region, we need a transformational strategic plan for infrastructure. We've been doing a lot of one-offs, and the REDCs are there to try to help shift things more strategically. But there were 3 primary goals for that conference. The first was a clear vision of the hard infrastructure needs in the region. Second, an infrastructure information platform that allows for shared opportunities and resource matching. And 3, a roadmap of how to move forward strategically to support a regional approach to growth. That was the overarching goal of that conference. So what we started with, and you'll see this in the booklet, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this particular piece, but it was an appreciative inquiry summit. Some of you may be very familiar with that, use it in some of your work and in some of the conferences that you facilitate. I could spend a half a day just talking about AI. So some of that is explained in the materials that I had given you. And so using that process, Dr. David Cooperrider actually came from Case Western and facilitated the entire conference for us over the 2 days and has remained a resource for us. We started with 14 bold ideas, is what we call them. So what would you do if, and then 14 bold ideas came out of that. In the end, about 8 action teams were created. 4 are really, really active right now. One is the mapping project, which initially was called Tech Valley Map. Now I think they changed the name to New York Sites. And that they are working, this action team that came out of the forum is working directly with CEG on this project, because that, coincidentally or not, depending on how you look at it, that is what CEG is moving forward with. So that project it is coming online slowly but surely. If any of you are familiar with the Adirondack Park, they did the Adirondack Association of Towns and Villages did a similar project. They did a similar mapping project. The one for CEG will include soft infrastructure as well. The one for the park actually was just hard infrastructure. You could do layering of utilities and those sorts of things. And what happened there was there were a lot of oopsies in the park, which has been true forever. And I'm from there, so I'm allowed to criticize it, I think. But I will give you a perfect example. So there's a forest preserve in the park, and there's a town road that goes through the forest preserve, and there is a tree that is on forest preserve land that has grown really, really big, and the school bus that goes down the town road keeps hitting the tree every day, that it goes back and forth. So the forest preserve people are really mad because this tree keeps getting hit. The town people are really mad because they just want the tree cut so that they can pass by without getting hit. And the school bus maintenance people are very upset because there's scratches all over the school bus. So something that you wouldn't ever think would be an issue, because so many different people own so many different parts of a tree and a road, they created this map to be able to say what were the unintended consequences of all of these actions and how can we fix that. So that's sort of the same idea here. Couple other things that I wanted to mention. I'm sure that I'm running out of time as far as my part on this. The other action teams that are very active right now, one is what I call the 21st Century Grid. Some of you may have heard of it as the National Grid Demonstration Project. They are working very closely with Global Foundries on that, and the idea is if there were no grid right now at all, what would it look like? If we were completely starting over, the end of the world and then the beginning of the world, what would we want that to look like? And so they're starting to work on that. There's a few funding issues there, but they do plan on moving forward with that. Also, and I'll talk about this later, so I just want to quickly mention it, seeker. Especially in the park and in this region, we're having some problems with the approval processes moving at the speed of business due to seeker, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. So I'm only mentioning these things because the public policy issues that these raise, and I know that's what Terry wanted me to get to, is we need predictability, we need certainty, we need sustainability, and we need clarity for economic development in all of these processes. If I'm a business coming in, I need to know that the community is going to be supportive of this project. I need to know what my tariffs are going to be. I need to know that there's a workforce that's ready now, and I need to know that there's a pipeline of workers coming in. I need to know that if I expand, like Global Foundries, that there is going to actually be the capacity for the water and the electric and the gas to be able to do that. So those are just some of the issues that are raised and that we're trying to address with these projects. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, my name is David Kay, as Terry said. I'm a Senior Extension Associate with the Community and Regional Development Institute at Cornell. And I'm going to be taking a bit of a different tack. I'm going to talk mostly about legislative changes and a new law in particular at the state level that's in the process of being implemented now. I'm actually trained as an economist, but I do a lot of work in the planning arena, so I'm kind of covering a land use planning perspective on this. And what I want to talk about is really a law that was passed that had the goal of trying to harmonize state infrastructure policy with broader planning and sustainability goals of the state, called the Smart Growth Public Infrastructure Policy Act of 2010. And just a quick check-in, is this familiar to everybody already? Yes? Everybody?
Can you explain it? I've heard it, but
I'll talk. Well, I'm going to be talking about it, but I didn't want to spend very much time on it if everybody knew, but I only heard one yes. So the reason I think this fits into the conference is because it's an effort by the state to recognize that funding for infrastructure is scarce in relation to the need. It embodies in law new procedures and to some extent new priorities for state agencies spending infrastructure dollars, and it's a recognition, as Kent alluded to earlier, and to some extent Kimberly more indirectly, that that growth and infrastructure interact with each other in multiple directions. Firstly, infrastructure induces, enables, or restricts growth on the one hand, and in the opposite direction, growth creates demand, both the type for both different types and different quantities of infrastructure. Smart growth, is that a term that's well known in this audience? Yes? Okay, so I'm just going to read one super short description for those who might not have heard of it. This is from the Smart Growth America. Smart growth is well-planned development, therefore it appeals to planners, that protects open space and farmland, revitalizes communities, keeps housing affordable and provides more transportation choices. So in other words, it does something for everybody. The law that I talked about, the new smart growth law, which was passed in 2010, its stated purpose is as a fiscally prudent state policy of maximizing the social, economic, and environmental benefits from public infrastructure development through minimizing unnecessary costs of sprawl development. So you notice the fiscal emphasis in that description about money and unnecessary costs. What it actually does primarily is require each state infrastructure agency, which is somewhat specifically defined in some ways and vaguely defined in otherwise, to file a smart growth impact statement before funding infrastructure. And in that statement, you need to document, the agency needs to document consistency with the smart growth criteria or justify any inconsistencies. So what are the criteria in there? This is actually somewhat important because it's the first time I'm aware of in New York State law that smart growth has actually been defined with a number of criteria, about a dozen criteria. I'm not going to go through them all, but I will say probably the most important ones are related to where development should be given priority, where it can happen, especially emphasizing where there's existing infrastructure already and in municipal centers, downtowns, things like that. There's some criteria related to transportation and reducing automobile dependency, encouraging mixed land uses and diversity and affordability of housing. There are a number of procedural criteria, including the one that Kim mentioned about trying to make building and land use codes fair and predictable. There's some aesthetic criteria about public spaces, and there are a number of stewardship and sustainability criteria, including most recently there was just new legislation passed, which I don't know whether Brian might talk about or not, that is about mitigating future physical risks from climate change. So what I just want to raise is the question, at a policy level. So with some funding from Brian's institute, which is the Water Resources Institute, we've been doing a number of case studies about implementation of this new law and the kind of impact it's happening in different agencies as they figure out how to implement the law. But I want to just step back and just raise questions about what I think are relevant to the broader question of the conference about what's the role of the state in infrastructure. And I'm going to just quote kind of two academic perspectives on this that maybe head in different directions to stimulate thinking and dialogue. So one well-known author said recently about the role of states in smart growth policy. The recent history of smart growth suggests that committed leadership, as well as the use of the bully pulpit, is important if policies are to have an impact. States such as Oregon and Maryland, with dedicated, high-profile, statewide smart growth programs, were able to see results. So that's one perspective. Here's another one. While there has been significant movement over the years among some states to undertake top-down legislative initiatives on growth management and smart growth, state-level engagement and local planning is highly controversial and potentially unlikely in many other states. And I would submit that in New York State, which is a home rule and Dillon's rule state at the same time, which some of you would know what that means, probably better than I do, that we've taken an approach that's more similar to the second approach. And that what we've been trying to do is weave weave smart growth concepts into policies and legislation that have been drawn through New York's existing institutional fabric, rather than trying to have a very high-profile top-down approach. And this is especially within the Department of State, particularly strategic approach that has been taken. And I could list, I'm not going to due to lack of time, but there's at least a dozen policies and a suite of policies that have some reference to smart growth in them in New York State that influence the way infrastructure is thought of in the planning processes, in particular that the state takes and to some extent that local governments take. And I guess I'll just end by talking about the importance of thinking about the state-local relationship and thinking about this. There's a lot of evidence that, particularly in the kind of state we are, which does allocate a significant amount of authority to, particularly in the land use arena, to cities, towns, and villages, and to a much lesser degree to counties, that it's very important to have policies that are working together as opposed to against each other if you want anything to happen. That's a significant change. And in this case, one of the things that we went on to do, besides looking at what the state agencies were doing in implementing this policy, was because the law does not directly affect local governments, but it does directly affect their ability to access state funding for infrastructure. So we've done some survey work trying to find out just about levels of awareness and perspectives of local government officials about this new law. And I would just say that for a law, given that this law is like not top of the, the highest controversies that local governments have to deal with, and it doesn't affect them directly, the number of people who are aware of it, it might be thought of as high, but sort of at an absolute level, it's actually pretty low. So there's a lot more work to be done to get local officials aware of this law and its possible implications, as well as all the other laws. And I think I will leave it at that.
Can I just make I want to just comment on this smart growth law of 2010, because many of my clients are local governments. We're very, in authorizing financing, we're very sensitive to making sure we go through what we call environmental compliance proceedings to overcome the Tri-County taxpayer case from the Court of Appeals back in 1986 or 83, which said if you don't do something under SECRA, your bonds are invalid. That's not good when you're giving legal opinions on bonds. What's interesting is that this is the second time I've heard about this smart growth law, which is, I guess, now 4 years old. And I would think that if it had an impact on local governments, NICOM and NISAC and those folks would have, and the Association of Towns would have been all over it. But I do think that it has a potential bleeding effect into becoming a seeker type thing, because as I recall, the act requires having a public hearing, going through some sort of determination, just like you do with environmental proceedings. But isn't that part of what that law requires?
Well, the main way I would say that it's radically different from SECRA is that it only applies to state agencies. There's no responsibility, legal responsibility on the part of local governments to do anything in relation to this law. And so it's only the state agencies that need to file a statement. And the other thing is that there's an explicit exclusion. You may know as a lawyer more about the importance of this, but I think it's very significant that there was a specific exclusion from the ability of interest groups or citizens to bring any lawsuits in relation to this. Yes.
Oh, that ought to be litigated. Seriously.
No, we like that. We don't want that.
And I will say we have about half a dozen sort of reports that kind of go into a lot more detail on various aspects of the law that are actually on Brian's Institute's website at the moment that you could look at. And my main message is that, this is a potentially significant reform to New York state law, but not that many people know about it.
Sure. How's this? We good? All right. So my name is Brian Rahm. I'm new to this setting. I'm coming from the New York State Water Resources Institute, which is at Cornell University. There's a WRI in every state, and we are generally charged with working on, let's just say, emerging issues of the state, or helping out with issues that are important to the state. And in New York, which is why I'm here, one of the main issues that we've chosen to focus on at our institute is infrastructure, particularly water resources infrastructure, which in some ways is nice because it's very broad. We'd be talking about water treatment, wastewater treatment, conveyance, distribution, things like dams, green infrastructure, all sorts of stuff. So our work covers a lot of that, and much of that stuff would be generally fall under the constructed environment that is of interest here. So one of the things we've done is we've tried to actually focus on these themes, and we don't do all the work ourselves. We do some of our own research, but a lot of the times we run grant programs and we get faculty from Cornell and across the state to work on these issues, hopefully in a coordinated way, so we can come out with something that's a little bit more comprehensive than just one or two studies that we understand very few people read. That's why we work with the Community and Regional Development Institute and folks like David Kay, because they have audiences that go beyond the traditional academic audience. We have extension folks, and so those are things that we like to try and use as well. One of our updates for our latest year's work is in the course packets that you have, and there's more stuff on our website, which we are frantically trying to keep up to date. One of the nice things about this project, as I said, there's a lot of different pieces to this. We're trying to bring in what you would normally think of for infrastructure, at least what we would think of, scientists and engineers who design this kind of thing. But we also recognize that folks who are doing things like policy and economics are critical to addressing this effectively. We also have sociologists, communication experts, and like I said, extension folks, all with the idea of informing people who are actually managing water resources in different places across the state, and policymakers both at the state and local level who maybe don't have the time and mandate to do some of the research that we're capable of doing. So sort of answering some of these interesting questions about, for example, how does this smart growth law affect New York? Are there other states doing this kind of thing? We can put those kinds of answers together in a coherent way. Why are we doing this? Probably not really news necessarily, but estimates vary, but it's a very high number. We'll call it $60 to $70 billion in need over the next 20 years for water and wastewater infrastructure across New York State. Nationally, the figure obviously is much higher. That's in the context of decreased federal funding, at least historically, if you're going to go back to the 70s, or as grants turn into loans and things like that. People are sort of trying to figure out how to finance and fund these types of things. The word we've been hearing is that this is an increasingly challenging thing to do. Some other evolving pressures, at least for New York, some places are growing, think of downstate, while other places, particularly some cities upstate, are actually losing population, losing tax base. Some of these older cities have very big sort of gray infrastructure, again, specific to water, wastewater treatment plants that are very large. They're losing population or losing some of the manufacturing and industries. How do you maintain those assets when they were built decades ago under very different types of projections than you have now? So it's a really interesting challenge in New York. A couple other things in the last couple of years, we've seen some pretty big storms. Irene, Lee, Sandy, all these things have highlighted just our approach in terms of planning and design when it comes to extreme weather events. We can talk about climate change forecasts, but in reality, it's really just dealing with extreme weather and whether or not we've done that well in the past. When you put these things in the ground, they last a very long time, and we need to be careful of these types of events. A couple of policy opportunities I just wanted to mention. We are focusing, again, a bit more on trying to get a bigger role for planning and particularly maintenance. So some of these things were already mentioned. These are very capital-intensive projects generally. If we're talking about sewerage, again, distribution lines, make up a very large part of the municipal budget. There's a lot of talk about transportation infrastructure, which I don't cover. That's usually one of the biggest budget items, but also water infrastructure is right up there. And when these things go on the ground, they're very difficult to make changes because after the initial investment, it's hard to sort of, make changes on these big capital investments. So one of the things that we've been seeing is sort of an ability to consider maintenance cost upfront. Are these effective projects over the life of the project or in terms of payback horizons? I read recently, we actually do read some of the comptroller's reports, which are sometimes interesting. I don't know how people feel about them generally, but some interesting things in there. He does mention P3s, so public-private partnerships, as some sort of creative ways of trying to get people to think about doing things differently in New York. That's growing cracks in the foundation if anybody's interested. And of course, I think other people are going to talk about design build, and we've been looking at that as well. A lot of times we've just found in our experience that engineering solutions do exist. That's not necessarily, or at least it's not always, where our real challenge lies. It's in the planning, the policy, the financing, the monitoring and maintenance of these types of things. So that's really where we're trying to bring more expertise to bear on this subject, at least at our institute. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that sometimes these systems are very interdependent. Well, they always are, really. Transportation and general economics or development, interdependent with these large water resources infrastructure pieces. We don't always understand how they link together, or we have poor institutional tools for dealing with those types of interactions. You can imagine, for example, if a water main breaks in an older city, you have to go up and tear up the road in that particular case, and you have to do it right then and there because that's a public health risk. You can't wait until next year when maybe you had a big transportation project planned. So you have to rip up the road twice. That obviously costs a lot of money and it's very inefficient. What we find is that a lot of times municipalities are basically reacting to failure rather than planning for the renewal of these types of infrastructure. On the bright side, if I can just spend a minute on that, there is a lot more work in terms of doing green infrastructure projects. That's usually involves stormwater abatement as a way to legitimately mitigate some of the stress on your gray infrastructure system. Places like Syracuse are obviously making a big deal about that. New York City is doing a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, it usually comes on the heels of a consent order. It would be nice to actually do that in a more proactive way when somebody wasn't really forcing you. Although, I guess if the consent order does it, that's somewhat positive. I guess one of the other things that we hear about talking with folks at the DEC, particularly the Division of Water, is the need for asset management at the local level. A lot of times this is totally missing. If you're researchers like us and you want to get a bigger picture of a region and you ask, like, well, how many sewer miles are there in Orange County? Orange County is actually one of the better ones, but a lot of times, like, you don't have that information. So it's very difficult to get this information on a regional or a statewide level, sometimes even at the local scale. It's all in somebody's head, or they're on paper maps and they're sitting in a basement somewhere. I think we have better technology now, and we can do better in terms of integrating all these pieces of data together. The DEC is trying to promote and incentivize asset management, and I think you'll probably see more from them pretty soon if you haven't already. But of course, I doubt they'll succeed on that alone. I think it needs to become something that we all just assume that we have, or are at least we're shocked when we don't have it. So I think there needs to be more expectation on the municipalities to develop these types of plans. One more card?
One more. Yeah,
all right, then we're done.
No, we got more to do. But
Okay, then I'm done.
Yeah.
So just touching on something that David mentioned, one of the things that we're also trying to do in our group is assess the effectiveness of some of these new policies that sort of overarch, rather than trying to go into the individual policies of the state and rewrite all the codes. Some of these things, like the Smart Growth Act, tries to sort of sit on top of it and direct agencies to do different things, but it doesn't necessarily get into the local level. Maybe that's effective, maybe it's not. I think it's probably too early to say, and that's something that we're interested in looking at into the future. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks,
well, thank you. We're not done. We still have about 20 more minutes.
Okay.
But this is about the laws. A lot of us who've been working in this field and believe that problems with operation and maintenance and making sure you have enough money, and the problems of planning in advance so that you can not run into the problem of a water main break and then you have to rip up the road twice. And we could go on, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. But we actually believe that one of the biggest reasons for this dysfunction is in the laws that are at the state level. They're very, very old, and you can read all about this in the materials. But we're grappling with modern problems with laws at the planning level, the construction level, and the finance level. I mean, it goes across the interrelated when you start working in this field. So with that in mind, we're going to end with everybody talking about the two things I think we should change. But before we go down the list, Kimberly's process, the one that she was talking about, they identified a number of problems or issues or things that they would like to change. So I just thought, since we had a three project description of stuff. If you could sort of indicate how they align with where your planning, appreciative inquiry planning process ended up.
So there are, of course, many obstacles and issues that were raised, but there were a few that I found were common through every single project, and so I just wanted to talk about those. One thing that I did want to mention in listening to the panel, we've had some phone calls together, is what I find very interesting is this room is filled with really smart people who are really good at their jobs, who are experts, and of course there's those lawyers that we've already been called today.
I'm a lawyer too. I didn't mean it that way.
No, that's fine. We're used to it. But what I found really interesting is at least a few of us on there had no idea about this law that affects our clients. There were some terms that were used that we didn't necessarily know about, and I think that goes to the point that no matter how much research we do, no matter what we look at, we still need to be talking to each other, because I learned more in the couple conversations that we had together about particular issues that I don't necessarily look at than I've looked at in years of my own reading. So I just want to get that message out there. Let's keep talking to each other, because there's always something new to learn. I don't know if you're familiar with Margaret Tobin. She's at ESD, and she spoke at our infrastructure forum. She said that there's two questions that always have to be asked first when it comes to hard infrastructure, and we usually don't ask them. It's who decides and who pays. And you must address these questions at the beginning. Even if you don't have the answer, it has to be on your radar throughout the entire process. Because the fact is, with economic development, we cannot have economic development without infrastructure, and there's no reason to have infrastructure if we don't have economic development. We are no longer, and I don't know that we ever were, in a position to be reactive. I think that we need to be visionary and practical at the same time. And so what are some examples of how we're trying to do that? There's a tech park slightly north of here that about 10 years or so ago had the secret process. They did the EIS. They did everything that they were supposed to do. They went through the zoning. There was a whole plan in place for how this tech park was going to be used. Well, things changed. And right now they're trying to do some PDD amendments with that. And I'm involved in it. It's a very difficult process in the sense that people are digging their heels in, saying, oh, all this work was done 10 years ago. We have all this. We just need to stick with it. But here's the problem. It is bad economic development practice to do that. Whether you're a planner or not, you have to think about economic development. If you are telling a company who comes to you and says, hey, love this place. This is where I want my business to be. And you say to them, oh, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate that. But it's not really zoned for you exactly. And we kind of want to put you in a different place. I mean, does that really make sense considering the state of our economy? I don't think so. And so I think that there needs to be much more flexibility in being visionary and practical at the same time. Let's re-examine the EIS. Let's re-examine what that zoning process is. One other quick example is there's in the same area a regional traffic study going on right now. We just had our first public hearing, or public information session about it. And a lot of the issues were, well, didn't you just do a bunch of studies 10 or so years ago? Yes. But just like you both were saying, those were for the projections 10 years ago. Global Foundries was still just had started discussions at that time. And so the projections for that time really have nothing to do with what it looks like right now. Are every single one of those studies being looked at? Yes, and they're on the website for this new study. So the idea is you do need to keep things moving, and you do need to be visionary, and you do need to be practical. And then one last thing, so I'm getting caught up here, is infrastructure relies on infrastructure. It's another thing that we can't forget. If you're going to dig up a road in a town, why don't you reach out to National Grid? Why don't you reach out to Time Warner? Why don't you reach out to Verizon and say, hey, I'm digging up my road. Do you maybe want to put in some new cables or something? Because in the end, it's going to save everyone a lot of money and a lot of time if we just communicate with each other. Because I don't think the government is going to put those requirements, I guess, in place where you have to talk to each other. It's just not in there right now.
Well, thank you. And we're going to do something later about the underground utilities in New York City, because that's a fascinating topic, but so thank you. I just had to say that because in New York, it's not just 1 or 2 utilities, it's 20, and it looks like spaghetti. But what I wanted to do, what we wanted to do, is to hit everybody, 2-3 minutes each, bearing in mind that they're old. If you could change 1 or 2 things, your top list to modernize New York State's laws that affect all the state level stuff and the local level stuff, what would it be? And maybe we'll just go down the table, and because the 3 presenters of the stuff really raised some issues that cross-cut the stuff, which is infrastructure and or public buildings. And so I thought if you could just, your top 2, what would they be? And we'll just go down the table. Thank you.
Well, this has not come up, but I tend to focus, given my my role as economist, I tend to focus a lot on the cost of these projects in the state, and we do make it enormously expensive to build infrastructure in the state of New York. We did a project for the New York State Economic Development Council a few years ago, looking at prevailing wage, for example, and the differential between prevailing wage and market wage on average across the state is about 36%. If you look at the total project cost, I'm sorry, let me pull back. If you're looking, if you're simply looking at the prevailing wage numbers, it's 67% statewide. And we did a kind of a prototype project, a $500,000 project, and capturing total project costs, the differential is about 36%. It varies quite a bit. The differential is about nearly 50% in New York City, and substantially lower upstate. And then we did a further comparison, taking a look at how prevailing wage affects competitiveness of projects within New York State versus other parts of the country, some of our competitors. And again, if you're looking at a total project cost basis, and you're comparing using prevailing wage in New York State, and either prevailing wage or market wage, depending on whether they have a prevailing wage law in some of these other states, the total cost differential in Scranton, for example, was still 41%. Austin, Texas, the differential was 58%. So the cost differential to building a project in New York versus building a project in Austin, Texas was 58%, driven by that prevailing wage number, because of course they don't have a prevailing wage law in Texas. So we've got a number of other of examples. If you're interested, drop me an email and I can send you a link to the study. But from a cost perspective, that's certainly something that's top of mind for folks we talk to.
Well, I didn't get a chance to really talk about finance issues, but
So now you
This is
do.
your chance.
well, but I need more than 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay,
Is that all right?
4. Okay, 4 or 5. But
So this will just sort of be reactive to the comments that the other panelists made. In the course material, I have this anthology of unpublished speeches, and the first one is a talk back in 2006, which is almost 10 years ago, to the Jackson Institute out in Jamestown, and it actually has some economic history of New York and political and constitutional history, and I'd suggest you read it because I think it's an appropriate background for what we're talking about here and what we've been talking about. But I start from the fact that this state's called the Empire State because it was built by the private sector, railroads, canals, people who made stuff, manufactured cars here, manufactured all kinds of stuff. It's all gone. All those cities upstate are wastelands now for all practical purposes.
Now, hang on just a second. Being from Rochester, I mean, wasteland is a little strong.
Well, I'll come.
Come visit.
I'll come down. No, I've been there. But I mean, the downtowns are vacant. The stores are vacant.
Well, that's why we're building more buildable real
Well,
estate by filling in the inner loop.
And the other problem is the population that does live there looks like Detroit. It's highly dependent. They're not contributing to the taxes. They are absorbing the expenses that have to be paid to maintain them there. Albany has a huge deficit right now. All the upstate cities have large deficits. Economic development is a great thing. The Economic Development Council, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, Brian McMahon's group, came out with a wonderful study about, or a request actually, about 2 weeks ago, where they want to use economic development for urban development. Basically, it's urban renewal cast as economic development, and it's sort of an anti-sprawl idea. But it's all about state funding and public money funding. Cities don't have enough money to pay for basic services, and the properties are being taken off tax rolls constantly for economic development. A study in 2012 by the controller, whose reports, by the way, I think are excellent, and I recommend that you read them all, makes the point that 30% of the real property in New York State doesn't pay real property taxes. That's a 45% premium on the residential and commercial property taxes that people pay here. This is why this is the highest tax state in the country. Bottom line, if you're going to do any of these things to make them work, you have to attract the private sector. And I take this position from the standpoint of not just an academician, but as a partner in a law firm that's got, I don't know, 80 offices in 95 countries. I forget what it is like. But essentially, the growth in economic development is going on outside the United States, but more particularly outside New York. And it's because what was the Empire State, private sector companies, large corporations headquartered here, not just Wall Street, but upstate, have moved elsewhere. The high-tech working population has moved elsewhere, with exceptions of Albany and a couple of other spots. But this goes to the point that you have to have laws and policies that attract private sector business. Why would private sector come and do anything? To make money. That's why they're in business. They make profits for shareholders. So let's look at our bidding laws. Procurement laws are bid and bill. They're bid-build laws, which require competitive bidding and increases the cost of construction because of separate contracts. Example, Rensselaer City School District. We got a special law when Joe Bruno used to run the Senate to allow the Rensselaer City School District, our client, to build a K-12 modern educational facility without having to go through public bidding, without having to go through any kind of competitive bidding for the finance, and do the whole thing with a project labor agreement. We built a beautiful school. Go out, when you're finished here, go out to Washington Avenue and look at that school. It's a beautiful school. It's a $100 million project that was built for $70 million. A 30% discount because we didn't have to go through all the procurement laws. Second, New York has a P3 bill. It was in the budget this year. Senator Ball, who's retiring, and Schimminger, Robin Schimminger in the Assembly sponsored the bill. It was worked on by my office, and we had a lot of input into it. It follows models which are adopted in Texas, Florida, Virginia, and Maryland. 34 states have P3 legislation in place which allows you to streamline the procurement, and what these gentlemen were talking about allows you to price the project not for the construction, but for its what we call the life cycle, which is the maintenance and repair and so on and so forth, and take the risk of the finance off of the public sector and put it onto the private sector who are there to make a profit. The Tappan Zee Bridge. Look, it's going to look like the bridge that down in Charleston where my ex-wife and my daughter and son-in-law live, which connects Mount Pleasant, which is the suburb, to the city of Charleston. They needed that bridge because they had some junky old thing. And it's glamorous, and it looks great, and it's helped economic development and all the growth in the area of Mount Pleasant. But what is the Tappan Zee Bridge going to do besides create a lot of construction jobs and create a mess for all the people at the other end? We have a bridge. Do you ever drive over the Tappan Zee Bridge? What's wrong with it? What's wrong?
I think
What the hell is wrong with the Tappan Zee Bridge?
Okay. Well, We
And
need to.
it's, you know, the George Washington Bridge is a bumpier ride. It's a real goat trip.
Well, but P3s is where
Did I
you were
finish
headed.
my point?
Oh, absolutely.
So the point is, if they really wanted to do economic development with the Tappan Zee Bridge project, they would have provided for rail. Not just we'll think about rail, but they would have connected White Plains to Suffern. And they would have made the New Jersey Transit and Metro North connect laterally, just, you know, like the subways in New York City, but on a larger scale. That would create a tremendous amount of growth. Instead, they have a smaller project. There's no P3 legislation. It's going to be financed with debt. And as the population gets poorer here, the tolls on the Tappan Zee Bridge are going to go up. If you take a look at Indiana and Florida, where they have badly conceived bridge and tunnel projects, they all go into default on the debt. So my point is this. If you want to grow New York, reach out to the world. Reach out to companies in India, and I've written about this, in China, in South America, who want to build and do projects in the United States. They're here already, but they're in Virginia, they're in Texas, and they're in North Carolina. Why? This is another important point. We have horrible annexation laws here. We have lots of teeny municipalities, all with home rule powers to stop projects so that you can't consolidate municipalities. And so annexation basically freezes all these small 19th century boundaries in place. If you go to Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Texas, they don't have all these local governments. And if a big company comes and wants to expand outside the city, the mayor says, that's fine, we'll just annex it. They don't have any say out there on that farm. We'll just annex it. And that's why you have Mercedes-Benz and Toyota and all the major international car manufacturers building things in those states. We just have a seriously antiquated law. I could go on about the state constitution, but I think I've given you my point on this.
And so in the remaining 5 minutes, if you could just go down the table and, you know, hit one or two things that you would love to see changed in the law, that would be great.
In other words, just hurry up. Got it.
Something like that. Okay, well, I mean, we'll just be cutting into the coffee break,
Absolutely.
which is okay too. You know.
So I'm going to mention 3 things, but I'm just going to mention them. So if you have any questions about them, by all means, please ask me afterwards. I mentioned SECRA before. Yes, it's a valuable environmental protection tool, but it does not move at the speed of business, and it needs to. So the Empire Center actually just did a report specifically on this issue, and less than 1/3 of all states have a similarly comprehensive environmental review. So what do we need to do? We need to put hard deadlines. For example, a draft EIS cannot just hang out there as a draft EIS. If, say, 30 days, 60 days, whatever passes, it needs to become final if no action is taken on it. And scoping needs to be mandated at the beginning so that additional issues cannot just be tossed in and tossed in and tossed in throughout the entire process, therefore making it much, much, much harder for special interest groups to use that as nothing more than a delay for the project, just as happened in the Adirondack Park in Tupper Lake. Second, and this isn't necessarily a lot, but this actually just does go to the EDC, Urban Revitalization Program, that they had just proposed with another different organizations. They proposed it to ESD. What I recommend is you not only have the urban program, but you have a suburban program and you have a rural program. There are similar issues. There are also very different issues. But if you have it all under one umbrella, that gives you the opportunity to identify those similar issues that you can work on together, so state money is being used more effectively. Also, in saying that more communication, and this isn't a legal issue, but more communication needs to be done. The Center for Economic Growth is developing this database, this one-stop shopping where all the information will come in. EDC needs to work with ESD, needs to work with the REDCs, needs to work with the DEC, needs to work with every single acronym in the state that you can think of to bring everything together so that it's all in one place. And we have to stop talking about that, and we just have to do it. Finally, and I'm not going to get into this, but the EB5 regional development centers that have been created, I'm also an immigration attorney, and so I do a lot of work with that. That's bringing a lot of that foreign investment into the U.S. It's controversial. For some people, because yes, in some ways you are buying a green card into the United States, but you are also bringing in at a minimum $500,000 in investment, and in many places $1 million in investment per individual, not per company. And the only way that you are allowed to get that green card is if that project actually creates 10 jobs. It's a great new, somewhat
Is it
new
their
legal
money that they're
entity.
bringing in?
It is their own private
Yeah.
money. Source of funds is scrutinized like you wouldn't believe. So any concerns that it's terrorists, it's drug lords, it's that sort of thing, that's been
It's well
published.
laundered, is what you're saying.
So I'm not going to get into controversial issues about that, but it is something that we need to pay more attention to, and I think people need to be more educated about.
All right, I'm going to actually not mention policy, but I'm going to say that what I think would be sort of a good thing to happen would be better education about infrastructure. It can start at all levels, but I think people need to be aware specifically. I'm coming at it from water resources infrastructure, so most people don't know where their water comes from. You go outside and you turn the tap on. They have absolutely no idea where that came from or how it got there. I think we need to know more about that in general. People should be educated. Should happen in schools. I think that for the general public, that means that people understand that these things are valuable. It means that the public understands that they're expensive and that they're things that we need to work together to find a way to pay for and maintain. For elected officials, I think it gives them a sense of how these systems are interrelated with transportation and the economy in general. And so that when you do these types of projects, they're not necessarily, they're having a better sense of how they all fit together, and they're not cut up into little pieces and sort of traded for political capital, because sometimes when you just put forward a piece of a plan, it doesn't work the way it was supposed to because you eliminated some of the other parts that actually were required to make it function. So I just think better education about our infrastructure in general would be a good thing in the future.
With my economist hat on training, I'll support the idea of efficiency, which is kind of the main goal that many economists have. Whatever you decide to do it efficiently. And then I'll switch quickly to say that I think one of the means to that end, with my planner's hat on, former president of the New York Planning Federation, in this context, I want to promote comprehensive planning that is really comprehensive and really planning and more universal, and support for that at the municipal level. And I want to support capital planning, which way too often is done not at all or very poorly. So ways, I don't have a specific prescription for how to get there, but I think there are a lot of policy aspects that would enable us to get towards that. And and the reason I'm saying that in the efficiency context is I really think what those things can end up doing is, that responds a bit to one of the items in the Smart Growth Act and what Kim and some of the other speakers may have been alluding to, is I think what we really need to do is to get communities to figure out what it is they want to see happen, and to make those things easier to happen and faster and more on a business time scale. And those things that they don't want to happen, not get all tied up in knots about it for years and years and years by saying we're not going to let them happen.
Most of my clients are local government, so that's a very good point. But a couple of things that what most communities want is to be left alone by the federal government in terms of regulating their securities, taxes, by the state, comprehensive planning, secret regulations, compliance with SEC disclosure rules for bonds. This stuff is overwhelming for the average municipal official. I think Brian's comment about education and management of water resources, it's a very tough thing to get good people to work in local government because they're on the ground actually having to do things. That is NICOM, NISAC, Association of Towns, School Board Association, they spend a tremendous amount of time in training, and it's hard to get good people to come in and do that because it's an overwhelming job. The management compliance requirements for local governments have become overwhelming. Second point I'd make is a lot of the construction that goes on you're right, isn't planned. I have a client who's taking down telephone poles because they want to make it more aesthetically looking nice. They're going to put the telephone lines underground because Verizon gave them a grant. I said, well, what about all your other utilities that are floating around? Why don't you fix them? Oh, no, we can't do that. You know, it's just the point. This kind of stuff it doesn't make a lot of sense. So if governments were using technology more, they would probably have better infrastructure and less repairs and more efficient. So.
Well, that's a great segue to the next panel. We don't really. Oh, Bert. Yes.
Not as an architect, but as a local water commissioner. It would be helpful to address Ben's point. Most often, and I'm on Long Island, so we deal with the aquifer, we're pumping water up, and we have air stripping towers and all of that. The understanding of the process for construction is overwhelming to most of the people who serve on these boards. They're local residents, they may even be in some cases volunteer firemen, who have no real exposure to this. It would be helpful, perhaps, if your institute were to do a study on the impact of alternative project delivery methodology on these projects, because some of them will fall below the WIC standards today, but a significant number of them are up above that demarcation line. And so we have people who are relying totally on an engineer coming in and saying, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and it's going to cost you $2.5 million. And it's not tax-driven money, it's race-driven money. The people who use that water are the ones who are specifically paying for it. And I think it would be very helpful for the majority of the water districts in our state to be able to look to a study that Cornell did that said these are the cost implications and this would support why we need to change the law.
We'll work on that for next year.
I'll just say that we're always happy to have people articulate project statements like that, so that we can actually, I mean, in some ways, we can farm out that question to people and see if they're interested in really working on it.
Brian?
So I'd be happy if people wanted to email me with a question exactly like that.
I want to ask Brian. I have another development business in Pennsylvania. Thank you. I'm glad to know Scranton is low cost. That confirms my suspicions. But seriously, in Pennsylvania, for example, there's something called Pennsylvania American Water Company, which is a subsidiary of, I'm sure you're familiar. Why don't we have private water companies running the water systems in the state?
We do in some cases.
But why aren't they all over the place? Because it just seems to me that would be a much more efficient way than having, I mean, I'm forming water districts and extending water districts. It's just a whole, and the legal fees are great. It's nonsense. It just really is nonsense.
What I would say is there's
Yeah.
Can I recommend that, that's a positional statement. There's a lot of research done on privatization, some of it by Cornell researchers, some of it supports what you're saying, but a lot of it says it's very contingent about whether it's actually a better solution to the problem.
I would never do this event again because I do this every, and I say I'll never do it again, but the fact that we've been talking and there's a lot of synergies and, as Kimberly said, continuing talking, maybe we could follow up with this and we could follow up on it. I don't know if we do a conference on it, but maybe we could in another year. But that sounds like really exciting.
You really need a P3 conference.
Okay, we can.
We
Well,
need to discuss.
but hello, we have panel 2. We need to, and I think people could use a little coffee and in the back. So we're going to break. The next and thank you. So I'm not letting go of you. We're going to continue doing this. So thank you. And we're supposed to be back. At what time are you starting? 10:30? 10:30. Start again.
Yeah, I got a question for you.
Great.
Unrelated.